Hello there. We're in London, of course, today, and we're looking at Canary Wharf, which is an interesting place I've never drawn before. And it's one of those kind of big industrial areas where it can take a while to work out how on earth to approach things. And I thought it might be useful for you to see kind of a bit of my process, because it literally involves walking around for an hour, but specifically taking photographs. Because when you take a photograph of a place, you kind of isolate it, you kind of think about exactly where that view is. So the video I take here, that's really for this video, that's to show you kind of how I'm looking. But throughout my sort of video research, if you can call it that, I'm continuously just taking a still, and looking at the image on the phone, because I use a phone camera, of course, doesn't everybody, in order to kind of isolate it from the reality. We, as we see in 3D, don't we? And we see with sensory awareness and all that kind of stuff. So we see in a very complex way, but the phone doesn't. The phone sees in a very simplistic way. So the ability to look at a still image and say that's balanced correctly or that's balanced incorrectly is kind of easy for us relatively. But when you're standing in front of a view, you see people holding up their fingers in like an L shape to get like a frame, so they sort of frame the view. That's the kind of thing that artists do in films. Or sometimes people will use a little kind of square sort of framing device, a little plastic or card framing device to kind of isolate the view, all of which works, of course. But for me, phone, because it's something I have with me, of course, and I find it a very immediate way of checking a view. So I've walked around. There were kind of 3 or 4 things I could have chosen, and I chose this view because it was a windy day, and this was sheltered from the wind. Unfortunately, it wasn't sheltered from the sound of people. One of those super busy little corners. Of course, when I sat down, it was early in the morning on a Saturday, and there weren't that many people around. It's a business district. But as I sat there over the course of 3.5 hours to draw this painting, it became so busy. It was almost overwhelmingly busy. So many people, and so much noise. So many kind of dogs barking and children crying and wheelie bags coming across this metal bridge, and the whole place was just clangy and clattery in a way that I had to put my both earbuds in. It was the only way I could have survived. So you can see I've come prepared for this. I know this is an area of high-rise financial buildings, therefore little square bits of glass. And I wanted to kind of do this in a sort of interestingly quick way. So I brought myself what we in the UK call a straight edge, which means a ruler with a handle on it, often used for kind of cutting with a scalpel when you're cutting out card. And super useful as long as you don't mind having to clean it afterwards when you're using something like an acrylic pen, as I am doing here. And as a way of getting what I still consider guidelines. Surprisingly, by the end of this painting exercise, I don't think a single millimetre of this underdrawing it remains. It's all been overworked. But this is my way of saying this is not a challenge about perspective. I have located the vanishing point. It's right sort of at the bottom third. You'll see a little dot where I keep making a reference to it, where I angle the straight edge towards it. So I know where my vanishing point is, and everything else I want to be vertical, and I don't want to have to think or worry about it too much. So I'm just throwing on lines now. They aren't a true representation of the fenestration, the windows of the buildings themselves. They are simply me saying this is vertical, this is horizontal, and this is perspective going back to a point. So it's a way of establishing a kind of grid on which the painting can exist. Now it's worth kind of pointing out that I had a bit of a game plan here, knowing the sort of view I would be working on involved obviously architectural form in a modernist way, but knowing that therefore it was going to be very regular grid shaped windows and forms. I had made a decision in advance but I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to just sort of slavishly copy the proportions of the windows. If you look at the final painting top left, when you first see it, it does look very architectural, but I hope with a painterly quality to it. And that's not about the brushstrokes or anything, it's about the irregularity, I hope, anyway. So what I mean by that is when you look at the buildings, specifically the building on the left, and I suppose the extreme right as well, they clearly have windows in them, and you can see the architectural forms, but you can't really follow them up. There's a sort of confusion, what I thought of at the time as a kind of tartanesque, which is probably not a word, but anyway, that kind of quality of overlaying of that gridded information, because I didn't want to sit there for 2 hours purely doing a very strict grid, because this is Saturday. I'm having fun. This is not some kind of exam challenge of my ability to draw squares. So I'm not doing that. What I'm doing instead is expressing something that I see as more interesting than that. So it's a kind of a more playful kind of blur of what architecture can be. It's that sense of highlighting reflections and mullions and pieces of glass and half-drawn curtains and blinds, and having all of those elements kind of jingle around each other a little bit so they don't feel so strict and trapped by geometry. I don't want to be held in by that. So that was an active decision. And part of the reason I've done this grid first is to kind of reassure myself that once you have that background grid, you can work within it completely freely. Because what I didn't want to do is for it to look perspectively incorrect. I wanted to look free and expressive, rather than, like an architectural illustration. It's one of my continual fears, is that I will create what amounts to an architectural illustration because I'm kind of sort of adjacent to that world, and that sense of it being kind of doing it for somebody else, an illustration, it's there to sort of show you what the buildings look like, for example, and there's just something rather forced about that. It doesn't feel very creative, I suppose. And as I stress, I'm supposed to be enjoying these things, and I did kind of enjoy this one, but they can sometimes be a bit like work, a bit pressured, a bit forced. These are all done to a deadline. I'm here with the London plein air painters, so we meet at 10 and chat for a quarter of an hour, and then on this occasion we agreed to meet back at 2 o'clock. So that means I've got to go off to my spot, I've got to set up, put out the easel, get out the paints, paint, skip lunch, and pack up in time to run back for 2 o'clock to be back in this little square park where we were going to meet everybody up and see what they've all done, basically. So that does put a kind of a stopwatch on it. 3.5 hours I gave myself, and in that 3.5 hours there was within an hour you're kind of thinking, okay, this is going to be a proper push. There's a sort of certain elevation of the blood pressure, I suppose, in a healthy way, in a good way, in a way that it doesn't feel like you're dawdling, it doesn't feel like you're just dabbling or daubing. It feels like you have a target and you're going for it. So it puts a real energy into the painting itself, and it does make you you have to make decisions what you do and don't do, put it like that. If I tell you what, this is one of the key differences between doing an image like this and if I'd taken the photograph, or if I kind of gave anybody the photograph that I'd taken from the same position I was in now and said, there you go, draw that. And the person drawing the photograph would feel, I think, as if they were required by some, hidden law, that meant they had to show the windows and the mullions and the vertical divisions in every piece of architecture in front of them in a way that was accurate and truthful. And I think most people would feel a bit kind of burdened by that. They may even find it necessary to trace the photograph just to keep their sanity, because it would be such a sort of tricky job to do that it would just feel too much. I would imagine it's not the kind of thing that somebody would do. Whereas if you're sitting in front of it and you've already said to yourself, I'm giving up on a lot for this Saturday, I'm not going to eat, drink or go to the bathroom for 3.5 hours, I'm going to push, I'm going to get this painting done, and therefore any corners you cut, absolutely no problem, you forgive yourself, because that's already enough of a job on, isn't there? So that's where this kind of creativity comes from, at least for me. It isn't me sitting down with infinite amount of time in a lovely warm studio thinking today I will be free and creatively, loose in how I paint a thing. I don't know whether I could do that, to be honest. It isn't really my way. But when you're live, when you're out and about and you're doing it, it's all about doing the very best you can in the situation you're in. And there's a compromise in that, and there has to be, and you fully accept it. I mean, if there wasn't a compromise, the world would be a different place. So you have to immediately kind of embrace the reality. Take, for example, I'm using a spatula. So that's a metal tool or into a plastic tool, which is just a flat edge, normally used for kind of plastering or when you have a little hole in your drywall and you want to patch it in. And I'm using that to get a flat sort of intermittent color, so when I'm using, for example, the white, and I press hard and I scrape it, it doesn't lay down a full color. It sort of does it in a very hesitant sort of textural way that I like, that makes me think of light reflecting on a window pane. And it's literally been done as a shortcut in certain areas and not done throughout, because if I did it throughout it would become a sort of a palette-knifey kind of painting. So I'm doing it selectively because I want it to enhance but not dominate, and I want it to be a shortcut. I want it to get me certain spirits, certain kind of hesitancies and irregularities in my paintwork, so it doesn't feel too mechanical. I guess that's the word. It's mechanicalness, if that's the word, that I fear, that sense of it being like a machine has done it. And I want to add that sort of happenstance type of mark that a scraper can do, because scrapers, you have bare control of them, hardly any control at all. And when you're trying to do something refined and fine, they just, they're never going to play nicely. It's like having a husky. So we're into the oil stage now. We started, of course, with the blue paper. We've used the acrylic pen to give ourselves the grid. Only sort of 2 blue colours just to give myself a bit of play. We've then got into acrylic. Acrylic is one of those materials that's useful, but I'm not really in love with. So I use it because it saves loads of time and you can get good coverage, and I'm never particularly happy, I suppose, when I'm using it. There's something about the material itself. It doesn't move in a fun way, although it moves in a very predictable way, to its credit. Whereas I always sort of look forward to the oil stage, and at some point I'll give up on acrylic entirely. But sometimes the oil can misbehave. Again, that has that living quality to it. I am using a new medium here. Mediums are the way you water down an oil and make it more fluid. Obviously, water down, the wrong word, because you can't use water. But you kind of you can use things like linseed oil will be the traditional thing. I often use a paintbrush cleaner called Zest It. That's my kind of preferred. I've been using that for years. I know what it does, and therefore that's part of the reason it's always in my kit. But I was trying a new one today, which was poppy oil, which had been recommended to me, and I struggled with it. Colours or manufacturers had different compositions and created different kinds of conflicts, I guess, with the medium. Anyway, I bought a little bottle, so no harm done, but I will use it again because I respect the people who've recommended it to me. So it's one of those things that probably it's me who's at fault and I need to use it in a better way. Another thing that's happened today on this painting more than any other, and it's partly to do with the people. I mean, I've framed the image here so you get some sense of the amount of people who are going past. The amount of people who were chatting to me was more than I've ever had. And I had a couple of people who were visitors to London, I'm guessing, who actually wanted to sit and chat for 10 minutes. And one very nice lady who was showing me her own paintings on her phone, which is all very lovely, of course, not very charming. And it's lovely to inspire people in that way. But of course, I can feel my internal clock ticking. I can feel that sense of, oh my goodness, I've got to wrap up and go back and meet everybody. So there's always that kind of slight sense that you have to keep the hand moving, you have to keep the brush moving. So even though you're chatting to people and you're being lovely and polite, you can't stop. And I think they pick up on that as being, that I think they respect that. mean, sometimes it's nice to have a break. Sometimes somebody coming over, you just want to sort of sit back for a second and have a chance to meet somebody different and have a little friendly, and it's very sweet. But if you don't have that time, just keep the brush going, and they understand, because in their eyes you're in the flow and you don't want to stop that flow. I also had, for the first time in a long time, 2 separate groups, or people coming over in small groups, asking how much the painting would cost. And they do it in that way where it's, they sort of say, I know you wouldn't sell this, but if you did sell this, how much would you charge for it? In that very kind of roundabout kind of way, which was funny in a way, because of course you never expect quite that when a painting is, at a stage when often they're looking at it and it's literally, halfway through or less. And you kind of think to yourself, do they realise how badly this painting could go from here on in? The whole thing could be a disaster in another 20 minutes. I could put the wrong colour down. I could, whatever. Something could go wrong. So that sense of it's their trust in you, even though they don't know you. They're just looking at what you've done so far and saying, I trust this process. In fact, a couple of times, like now, for example, at this point, I took a 2-second break to unscrew some paints and clean a brush or two, and somebody came over and said, it's finished then. It looks it looks good. And I'm thinking, it's so not finished, and it so doesn't look good yet. It's so so early days, I guess. But if you're painting in a classical style, then when the painting's finished, and sort of everybody does. There's a sort of a knowableness to when it's finished, in terms of you've put paint everywhere and it's all done to the same quality. Whereas when you're doing something a bit sort of more rough-edged and, as I say, abstracted, then people don't know. For me, the tower in the background, which is really the highlight really of the subject or the focus of the piece, it's called Number 1 Canada Square, by the way, because the Canary Wharf development was originally part of a Canadian investment group. They kind of came up with the idea for it. I'll come back to that, don't worry. But anyway, for me, it's kind of embarrassingly ill-defined. And in fact, I go back to it numerous times. In fact, what I'm trying to do really is take all of the painting up in steps. And I guess that's partly a response to the timing constraint. My fear in life, or in painting or drawing, is one part of the drawing is completely unfinished and the rest is finished. That seems to be the worst possible situation. So what I'm trying to do when I'm doing something slightly larger scale, where time isn't necessarily on my side, is if I had to stop at any one moment, it wouldn't be a total car crash. It would be enough for me to finish when I get back to the house, that kind of thing. Oh, by the way, there's a lovely Chinese lady who's currently showing me her phone, showing me her paintings, and I'm chatting to her, and you're seeing the result of me absolutely not stopping. I'm not going to I'm not stopping. I'm so sorry. You paint lovely plants and flowers. You do it very well, madam, and I'm telling you so. But I can't. Oh, and by the way, we're doing it through Google Translator app thing, where she's speaking into her phone in Chinese. It's translating into English text, and I'm having to read the English text and sort of respond to her phone that then translated it into Chinese. All very high tech, but as I say, potentially distracting, but nevertheless. Anyway, my point about painting in sort of steps or stages, making sure that the whole thing moves sort of forward at roughly the same rate, that's also really because it would be boring for me. I mean, imagine for example, I hadn't done the tower in the background yet. I'd done the buildings on the sides, and I decided I was going to finish the buildings on the sides, finish the bridge, finish the sort of the water, and finish all of it, and then do the tower in the background. I mean, oh God, that would be so boring. My head would be just like flying off by hinges. I haven't got any hinges, but that sense that it's like I have to go through it again, go through the process of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 for this back building. It would just seem so, so labor intensive, so laborious. So if you take everything forward to stage one, whatever you think stage one is, and everybody has a different view on that, but the first part, the first draft, the first wash of paint, and then you take it all through to stage two. This, of course, is something you can do in acrylic and oil and acrylic pens, all these things. You can't do it really with watercolour. And I suspect a lot of what watercolour is, as far as a medium, and it's, the way you have to use it, I expect that affects the way lots of people talk about this kind of painting and drawing and sketching, because so many people use watercolour, that kind of light wash effect thing, which is, very fine and very proper, but that isn't the way that any other paint works, really. This young lady just bought me lunch. Isn't that the most lovely thing? And I was telling all my artist colleagues at the end of the day how this young lady had come back and said she just bought herself lunch. She'd walked past me on the way to the lunch stop and thought that, that gentleman is probably not able to have lunch, so I'll buy him some tzatziki and a phyllo pastry Greek thing. Don't know the name of it. Very nice. And when I was telling my friends about it, they said, oh yes, that happens a lot because they think you're homeless. They think you're like a person who's, because you wear painty clothes and you're kind of a bit scrabbly, and you're sitting there doing a painting as if like a homeless person might do a chalk drawing on the ground. So certain people, sort of younger people, think that's a trigger for for being generous and kind, and I don't think that's true at all. I think I was wearing very nice shoes, so I'm sure I'm fine. I'm sure she just thought it was her way of being supportive, and I thank you. If you ever get to see this video, you're a star. May you have a very happy and long life for doing that. And I recommend the restaurant to anybody. It was a very nice bit of Greekness. Anyway, what was I just talking about? For me, the idea of putting down big sort of bold marks like the spatula marks. I mean, you can still see a lot of the spatula marks here at this stage, but I'm about to refine sort of a pattern over the top, that kind of sense of reaffirming the grid, putting it back in place, and then distorting it and getting rid of it in certain areas and enhancing it in others. And behind it is this spatula effect, which is kind of just going to glimmer through, and in the end it's all still there really, but it doesn't shout as it currently shouts. It just does a sort of job. I mean, the truth is that I could be quite negative about my paintings. At this stage of the painting, I was having a bit of a little mini panic attack, thinking that I've taken on too much. This is too big a painting in too restricted of a time and far too complex a space. Self-doubt. So I got to a stage, in fact, for a large period throughout the middle portion of this painting, I was doubting whether it was going to be worthwhile. I was thinking, can I actually meet up anybody at the end of the day? Are they just going to be too, embarrassed for me that this hasn't worked? And I was really, and I genuinely had that in my head playing for a couple of hours. And it's only really now, having recorded the whole process, I keep sort of looking at it, because this is the first time I'm watching it back and thinking, well, what the earth was I on about? It's fine. I could have stopped here. That works too. So it's an odd thing. And again, maybe this is useful, for other people. If you kind of have that self-doubt, is that a voice in your head that's just, programmed in from whatever's happened in the past, and, the voice in your head, that voice of doubt? And maybe if, even if you're doing something at home, you're doing something creative at home, whatever it may be, just set your phone up, record, and watch it back. Because I'm finding it very supportive to watch. Oh, that sounds awful, doesn't it? I'm finding it supportive to watch my own videos. God, I'm so vain. But what I mean to say is, I thought the painting was in a much worse state, and it was only kind of saved in the last 20 minutes, that kind of thing. And I wonder how much of that is programmed into me by the very act of it being a timed exercise. And obviously it's only by the end that I feel as if it's finished. And so when I look back on it, and for example, in the middle of that tower in the background, the spatula put a little kind of dot mark. You'll see it 3/4 of the way up, right in the middle of the tower. And right towards the end, I deal with it. But the whole way through, I was thinking I have to deal with that bit. That's embarrassing. That's kind of like desperately, humiliatingly wrong. That's bad spatula use. And I look at it now and think it's a highlight, as in a moment of shininess, a moment of brightness on the tower. At the time, it felt like some massive flaw, like I'd spilled a bottle of ink all over the drawing. It felt obviously wrong. And now I'm kind of thinking, what on earth was I going on about? So if there's no other benefit to me than for this YouTube channel, I know the benefit will be that watching my own process is reassuring me that the voices of self-doubt are just voices. They're not based on anything. They're just the stuff in your head that doesn't get out of the way. And that when I hear those voices, I need to remember the videos and think, okay, yeah, shut up, and just get on with it. Because, as I say, people were being super supportive, and sometimes you can feel a bit suspicious because people come over and are so nice. You think, no, that can't be right. But as I say, I kind of like it now. This is a sort of good hour before the completion. So if in my head this was the height of the potential panic attack, is it going to be done on time? It's a weird thing, actually. I think that's something to do with the act of the painterliness. By painterliness, I mean a sort of hesitancy and irregularity. If you're drawing with a pen, like an acrylic pen, as I often do, you can be very precise, and with that precision comes that reassurance that that line is then correct. So, done. Whereas when you paint, especially with oil paint, that kind of, you're laying down this creamy, colourful sort of smear of material that can blur and blend and be jogged off by your fingers with the next stroke you make. And if you try to add another colour on top of it, they kind of meld and smudge, and it's just like, can be considered as pretty nightmarish. But of course, once you go past that fear of it becoming like a big sort of sticky mess, you realise that you can maybe not control this smearing, but you can go with it in a way that creates this sense of painterliness, meaning something else happens that you're not particularly in control of. It's not as if you wanted it to smear in that way, but when it did, it made it feel like a painting. I mean, the bridge itself, which is the South Quay Footbridge, it's kind of curving, it's metal, it has this very dramatic kind of post, what would you call that kind of thing, mast, that holds it up with tension wires that kind of suspend it over the water. And I kind of kept going back to it thinking, well, this is a complete disaster. It feels completely unfinished. I kept redoing the shine on this big kind of flagpole type thing. Oh God, what's the name for those things? When you have a big column that support, column would do. It's kind of angular column that goes at like 20 degrees that holds everything up. I kept going back to it and kind of outlining it and giving it more kind of sort of metallic shine, because it's kind of a stainless steely kind of material. Kept sort of going back and doing the handrails around the bridge itself. And I look at it now and think it was fine from an hour in. It did, because the eye fills in the rest of it. I guess that's the key. And that's what painterliness does. It creates enough kind of blurriness that the human eye can kind of focus it and add in the correct detail it wants to see. And that's the lovely thing about paint that you don't really get with any other medium in quite the same way. That sense of the human being looks at it and sort of corrects it and enhances it, because it feels like it's slightly out of focus in a very sort of interestingly creative way, out of focus on purpose, and the eye works with that. It understands that a human being has made those decisions and therefore works with it. And the truth is that sometimes a human being was barely in control of it, as in this case, because it's oil paint, and oil paint is just like a thing unto itself. It's kind of a completely crazy, blurry, smudgy, messy, beautiful thing. And you can't ever own it, well, by own it I mean you can't master it, or at least unless you're a master. My point being that we as normal human beings, we can't master it. We're just kind of holding onto the reins, and it's kind of galloping off ahead of us, and we're just hanging on for dear life. But it's still extremely exciting to even be involved in it. So, yay, oil paint, I'm always recommending it, aren't I? And you'll notice, because some people will talk to me and say, look, oil paint's all very good, but it's super expensive and not everybody can afford that kind of thing. I'm using 4 colours in this painting, as in oil paint colours, and that's 4 tubes. Another advantage of this kind of single colour style, where it's basically blue on blue with some dark and some light, some shadow, so that's grey, and highlights which are white, is that not only is that obviously more cost effective, you carry less around with you. Theoretically I could have a small bag with just these few paint tubes in, and also takes your choices out. Now you might think that when you're doing a painting and suddenly you restricted the amount of choices you're allowed to make, you would think that would be an awful thing, that you need to have 500 colours in your box so you can choose the right colour. But once you accept that you're doing what amounts to sort of a single colour painting like this, it's a blue painting. If you kind of pre-agree to yourself that that's what you're doing, and you're taking the blue paper as a way of reinforcing that, then the actual act of painting itself is made radically easier, because no longer are you reaching down and thinking, oh my god, do I use the magenta or the vermilion or the... So if in doubt, just try one colour. Go on. It's fun because it takes a lot of that grief out of it, that sense of I don't know which colour exactly and I can't match the exact colour I'm seeing and I keep mixing it and it's never quite right. It gets rid of all of that, because all you're saying is, well, very little of what I'm going to paint is actually blue. You can argue that the reflections of the sky are blue, but that's about it. Most of it's metal and glass and blah blah blah, and therefore the choice of blue is obviously an artistic one, a sort of stylistic one, and therefore it kind of overwrites any other rules. I'm no longer at any point saying to myself exactly what colour of whatever turquoise is that piece of glass, and is the glass in that building the same specification, is its kind of solar reflective film the same colour, and should I therefore add a bit more of this to that to make it look, and then just no, none of that. And not only that one of the freedoms, and again this makes me sound like a bit of a naughty person, but one of the freedoms of that decision, it also means you don't have to look so much. I find it personally a bit sort of emotionally exhausting when you're doing a painting like this, and you can imagine how much you're actually looking up at what you're painting and making a judgment call. And at the moment I'm looking up and working out the form of it, and that's all. What is it? Where is it? Not exactly which shade is it. Where is it on the colour wheel? I'm not having to think about its colour, I'm just understanding it from a sort of geometrical point of view of where it exists in space, which is already a bit big enough of a job. But if you add colour into it, it's just like, oh, heaven's sake. But I hope we've enjoyed ourselves. I have. I hope you've enjoyed some of it too. And I hope I've inspired you to think about, single colours. Just embrace that blue. Go on.